I used to think I was steady, not calm, steady, the kind of man who could keep his face flat no matter what was happening. When I was young, people called that strength. I called it strength too, because it sounded better than what it really was. The first time I learned how easy it is to postpone your own life, I was 19, standing in a bank hallway outside a manager's office. The lights buzzed. The carpet felt damp from someone's wet shoes. My father stood beside me in his Sunday jacket, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier waiting for orders. He was doing the talking for both of us, the way he always did. The loan was small, just enough for tools, enough to get started right, enough to be safe. When the manager slid the papers across the desk, my father didn't look at me so much as aim me. I signed. My pen scratched the line, and my signature looked like it didn't trust itself. On the walk back to the truck, my father clapped my shoulder once and said, "Now you won't have to worry." That sentence followed me like a shadow. I built my days around it. I took the job that paid more even when it drained me. I stayed late because it made the numbers look better. I turned down trips because they were extra. If someone asked what I wanted, I gave answers that sounded responsible. Stability, security, a future. I thought later was a smart word. Later meant careful. Later meant you weren't reckless like other people. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sit at the kitchen table and feel a thin ache behind my ribs, like an unopened room. I'd stare at my hands that could fix things, and I'd think, there's something I'm avoiding, something important, something that will cost me if I keep pretending it isn't there. And every time that thought rose up, I did what I had practiced. I pushed it down. Not now. Later, when work slows. Later, when the bills are lighter. Later, when I'm less tired. I didn't see that later wasn't a date on the calendar. It was a habit. It was a way to live without choosing. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was being careful. I thought I was protecting my life. What I was really doing was teaching myself how to stay in the hallway, forever waiting outside the door, convinced the right moment would arrive and save me from having to knock. Back then, I believed a good man avoided mistakes by delaying them. I believed you could wait long enough to find a clean answer. I didn't understand that the delay was a mistake. While I stood in that hallway of my own making, the world kept moving, and the doors I meant to walk through didn't stay open forever. I learned that too late, but I learned it. When I met my wife, I was already good at looking like a man who had it together. I had a truck that started every morning and a plan for the next 5 years. I talked about rates and budgets the way other men talked about dreams. I thought that was maturity. We met at a backyard barbecue when the air still held heat after dark. She laughed at something I said and then asked me a question I didn't know how to answer. "Do you like your life?" she asked, casual as if she'd asked what I did for work. I said the safest thing. "It's fine," I told her. "I'm building something." She watched me for a moment, not impressed, not cruel, just clear. "Just don't build a life you can't live inside," she said. We married, bought a house, filled it with furniture and routines, and I took seriously what everyone praised me for, being responsible. I provided, I paid bills early, I fixed what broke, I did the visible work. But when my wife needed the kind of work you can't measure, I delayed. When she said she wanted to travel more, I said next year. When she said she felt lonely even with me in the room, I said work was a season. When she said she wanted kids, I said we should wait until things were more stable. I offered the future like it was a gift I could wrap whenever I had time. One night she came into the garage while I was bent over an engine, hands black with grease. The overhead light made hard shadows. She stood in the doorway for a long minute, then said, "I need you to hear me, not fix me." I wiped my hands on a rag and tried to stay steady. "I hear you," I said. "No," she said, voice tight. "You hear words. You don't hear what it costs me to say them." I felt something in me want to crack open, the part that knew I was failing her. I wanted to say I'm scared too. I wanted to admit I didn't know how to be present without losing control. Instead, I glanced back at the engine like it could rescue me. "Let's talk later," I said. "I'm in the middle of something." Her face didn't twist. That was the part that should have scared me. She just nodded once, like she had already expected my answer, and walked back into the house. After she left, I stared at the engine and understood too late for that moment that I'd been using metal and noise as a hiding place. I told myself I'd talk to her tomorrow when I had the right words. Tomorrow came, then another, and the conversation stayed parked in later, right where I kept everything that asked me to be real. The truth is, I loved her, but I loved feeling competent more. Work made me competent, feelings made me clumsy. So I kept choosing the place where I could win, and I called it duty. I didn't see how often duty was just my fear wearing a respectable coat. From the outside, our life looked like success. We hosted holidays. We took pictures in front of a tree. I earned raises and got called dependable. People told me I was lucky, and I believed them because it was easier than looking closely. Inside the house, something thinned. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't slammed doors. It was quieter than that. My wife laughed less. Her questions got smaller. Eventually, she stopped asking anything that required me to show up. I told myself this was normal. Marriages settle. Heat fades. Routine takes over. I acted like the quiet was proof we were stable, when it was really proof we were drifting. One Sunday in late fall, I sat at the kitchen table sorting bills. The radio played low. My wife dried her hands and sat across from me with her fingers folded like she was preparing for bad weather. "I think I want to go back to school," she said. My chest tightened before I even answered. School meant tuition. It meant risk. It meant change. I was so trained to measure life by what could go wrong that I couldn't hear what she was trying to reach for. "Why?" I asked, too sharp. "Because I want to," she said. "Because I'm not happy where I am." I should have leaned in. I should have asked what she needed. I should have admitted I was scared and asked her to walk through it with me. Instead, I defended our life like it was a structure under attack. "We're doing fine," I said. "Why throw things off?" "It already feels off," she said quietly, inside me. That sentence opened a door. It was an invitation, painful but honest. And I did what I always did when a door opened into something I couldn't control. I turned it into a timeline. "Let's wait a year," I said. "Let's get more saved when things stabilize." Something in her eyes dimmed, small but unmistakable. "You always say that," she said. "I'm being practical," I told her, as if practicality was a virtue that excused everything. "I know," she said. "That's the problem." She went back to the sink. The conversation ended without a fight. which I mistook for peace. That night I lay in bed listening to her breathing, wanting to reach for her, wanting to say, "I'm sorry," wanting to admit I didn't know how to do this right. But admitting it would have meant choosing a different way to live. It would have meant risking failure in the open. So I stayed still and stared at the ceiling and promised myself the same lie I always promised. I'll bring it up tomorrow. In the morning, I went to work. That's how time started taking from us. Not in one dramatic moment, but in the quiet space between an invitation and the answer I kept postponing. In that season, I began to feel a quiet panic, like waking up mid-dream and not knowing where you are. I would watch her across the room and sense her drifting, and I would promise myself I'd catch up soon. But soon was just another word I used to avoid the present. The first time my wife packed a bag, I didn't believe it was real. I thought it was a warning shot, a way to make me finally pay attention. I didn't understand she had been paying attention for years, and I was the one who kept missing the message. It was a Wednesday night in early spring. I came home late. The porch light was on, but the house felt dim, like the rooms were holding their breath. My keys hit the bowl by the door and made no sound. The bowl was empty, and that small detail rattled me more than it should have. In the bedroom, her suitcase was open on the bed. She folded clothes with the calm efficiency of someone finishing something she'd already decided. "What's this?" I asked. "I'm going to my sister's," she said. "For how long?" She looked at me, eyes clear. "I don't know. I need space." My heart pounded like I was in danger. "We can talk," I said quickly. "We can figure this out." She nodded, almost gently. "We've been figuring it out for a long time." I stepped closer, suddenly desperate. "Just don't go." She zipped the suitcase and set it on the floor. "Do you know what it feels like?" she asked. "To ask someone for years to show up and watch them keep choosing later?" That word, later, landed like a hard object. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to list the hours I worked, the bills I paid, the things I fixed. Even as those excuses formed, I could hear how hollow they were. "I didn't know it was that bad," I said. It was true, and it was also the most damning thing I could admit. "That's the other problem," she said. "You didn't know." She walked past me with the suitcase. I followed her down the hall like a man chasing his own shadow. "Tell me what to do," I said. "Just tell me." She stopped at the door and held my gaze. "I already did," she said, over and over. Then she left. I stood in the doorway, watching her taillights disappear. The night smelled like wet grass. I remember thinking this can't be happening, because my mind still believed time would protect me from consequences. The next days were a blur. I went to work like a machine. I ate without tasting. At night I sat in the living room with the TV low and my phone in my hand, typing messages and deleting them. I drove to her sister's house once and parked down the street, watching the light behind the curtains. I didn't knock, I didn't call, I didn't go in. I told myself I was respecting her space. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was giving her time. But the truth was I was afraid that if I went to the door she would say something final, afraid I would hear a sentence I couldn't undo, afraid of choosing in the open. So I waited, I delayed. I tried to buy my way out of reality with time. And time, I was learning, does not bargain. Weeks turned into months. She came home once to pick up more clothes. She moved through the house like a visitor, careful not to touch too much. I offered coffee. I said her name too often. She thanked me politely and left. I started noticing how much of our life had been held together by her attention. The house was quieter, but it was also looser, like the seams were coming apart. I realized how easily I had confused providing with showing up. I had treated money like love and time, like something I could schedule later. Eventually, I called a therapist and I hated myself for how late it was. In the first session, I tried to defend my character. I told him I was a good man. I worked hard. I didn't drink too much. I didn't hit anyone. I said it like I was presenting evidence. He listened and then asked, "And where are you in your own life?" I started listing responsibilities again. He let me finish and said, "No. Where are you when you aren't performing your role?" My throat tightened. "I don't know," I admitted. He nodded. "That's honest. Now write her a letter that doesn't negotiate. No plans, no timelines, just truth." I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. The house was silent. I wrote her name at the top and stared at it until my eyes burned. I wrote a sentence that sounded reasonable and crossed it out. I wrote a promise and crossed it out. Finally, I wrote what I had never said out loud. I was terrified that if I chose you the way you needed, I would fail you. When I wrote it, my hand shook. Tears came fast and humiliating. I kept writing anyway. I wrote about my father and the bank hallway and the way I learned to equate steadiness with silence. I wrote about how work gave me rules and feelings didn't. I wrote about how I used later to avoid being fully seen. The letter was messy. It didn't sound like a man in control. It sounded like a man finally telling the truth. I drove to her sister's house with the envelope in my lap, gripping it like it could burn me. The porch light glowed warm. The neighborhood was quiet. I stood at the front door and raised my hand to knock, and my hand stopped in the air. All the old reflexes flooded back. Don't rush. Don't make it worse. Think first. Wait. Later. 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 I lowered my hand and walked to the mailbox instead. I left the letter there like a cowardly offering and returned to my car. Sitting behind the wheel, I felt sick with clarity. I had repeated the same mistake in a new costume. I had delayed the real decision again, to show up face to face and accept whatever truth waited behind the door. As I drove home, I realized something that scared me more than the silence in the house. Time wasn't just passing, it was closing options, and I had been handing it the keys. 2 weeks later, she called. Her voice was calm, which somehow hurt more than anger. Anger would have meant heat. Calm meant distance. "I read it," she said. I stood in the kitchen with my back against the counter, staring at a magnet on the refrigerator like it was holding me up. "Okay," I said. "I'm glad you wrote it," she said. "I'm glad you're finally looking at yourself." Hope flared in me. "Does that mean It means," she interrupted gently. "I needed that letter years ago, not now." My mouth went dry. I didn't know," I said, the same sentence I hated hearing from myself. "I know you didn't," she said. "That's why I couldn't stay." "Can we try?" I asked. "I'm trying now. I can show you." "I believe you're trying," she said. "But I'm different now." Different now. That line landed heavy. I pictured her changing in slow increments while I stayed in place, waiting for a moment that kept passing. "This isn't about someone else," she added before I could ask. "This is about me finally choosing myself." I wanted to bargain. I started offering timelines again, counseling, months, proof. She went quiet and then said, "Do you hear yourself?" Shame rose in me like heat. I could hear it too. I was still trying to delay the truth. I was still trying to turn a feeling into a plan. "What's the real decision?" I asked finally. "To accept what's true," she said. "To stop treating me like a future project." After we hung up, I drove to the lake outside town, the one we used to visit in the early years when we still felt like a team. I parked and sat in the dark. The moon made a thin line across the water. The air smelled like cold stone and mud. I thought about all the times she had opened a door and I had chosen not to walk through. I thought about how I used time like a shield, believing delay was harmless. Sitting there, I admitted what I didn't want to admit. I had used time to avoid risk, and avoidance had become its own kind of damage. The decision I delayed until it was too late wasn't a single action. It was the decision to be fully present while it still mattered, to accept discomfort in real time, to choose connection over control before the distance hardened into something permanent. Now I was trying to do it after the fact, like a man showing up at a station after the train is gone. I sat in the car and let the grief settle without fixing it. It wasn't dramatic. It was heavy and plain. I remembered a moment from early in our marriage when she asked if I ever worried we were wasting time. I laughed and said, "Time's on our side." I believed it then. Now I knew the truth. Time is on nobody's side. It doesn't care that you meant well. It doesn't care that you were tired. It keeps going. I drove home slowly, hands steady, and I understood that the next decision wouldn't be about getting her back. It would be about whether I finally learned to live without hiding behind later. The divorce paperwork arrived on a Tuesday in a plain envelope. I held it at the kitchen table and felt the familiar impulse rise. Don't open it yet. Wait until the weekend. Wait until you have time. Wait until you're ready. I stared at the envelope and felt something cold in my stomach. Ready for what? For facts to change? For paper to soften? I opened it. The pages were crisp, clean, legal. The sentence that mattered most was simple: dissolution of marriage. It looked like something that belonged to strangers. It didn't look like her laugh in the backyard, or the way she lined up spice jars, or the quiet way she used to say my name when she wanted me to come to bed. I called her. She answered on the second ring. "I got it," I said. "I figured," she said. "I don't want this," I said, because I needed to say it once in the right moment. "I know," she said. "I didn't want it either." We were quiet together on the line, two people holding the weight of something that could have been different if one of us had stopped waiting. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know you are," she said, then softer, "I hope you mean it the way you're learning to mean it now." I signed the papers that night. My signature was steady, but my hand didn't feel like mine. I mailed them the next day. No delay, no bargaining, no request for more time. After that, the house felt like a museum of my old life. I would walk into a room expecting her footsteps. I bought two things at the grocery store and felt stupid in the parking lot. I kept the television on at night just to fill the air. Then I started making smaller decisions on purpose. I cooked real meals. I sat outside with my coffee for 10 minutes before work. I called friends I'd neglected and said, "I disappeared. I didn't know I was. I'm sorry." Some answered, some didn't. In therapy, I told the man I felt like I'd woken up too late. He didn't try to comfort me. He said, "Late is still awake. The question is what you do now." That line stuck because it wasn't sentimental. It offered responsibility. One evening, months later, I stood in my garage over the same old engine I used to hide behind. The smell of oil and dust was familiar. I ran my hand over the metal and felt the irony. I had been careful with machines and careless with moments. I turned off the overhead light and stood in the dim, listening to crickets outside. I thought about the man I'd been, proud, steady, terrified, and the man I wanted to become. I couldn't scrub out the decision I delayed. It was a scar, and scars don't vanish. But once you finally see your pattern, you can't pretend you don't. The next time you reach for later, you feel the lie in your hand. So I practice choosing in real time, saying the thing while it still matters, showing up while the door's still open, not because I'm brave, because I have learned what it feels like to be too late. On quiet mornings, I sometimes drive past my ex-wife's old neighborhood, not to spy, not to reopen wounds. Memory just has its own gravity, and some roads pull you back without asking. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was losing what I built. Now I know the worst thing is building a life so carefully you never actually live inside it. You become a manager of circumstances instead of a participant in your own days. The dangerous part is I didn't feel cruel while I was doing it. I felt responsible. I felt praised. You can postpone love and call it practicality. You can postpone honesty and call it patience. You can postpone presence and call it providing. You can bury a decision under good intentions and still arrive at the same ending. My father is gone now. When he was dying, I sat beside his hospital bed and held his hand, surprised by how light it felt. He opened his eyes once and looked at me with the softness I hadn't known when I was young. "Did you do okay?" he whispered. I swallowed. "I tried," I said. He nodded faintly. That's all. He breathed and closed his eyes again. After he passed, I sat in my car in the parking lot and thought about that bank hallway. I thought about how he meant well, how he tried to hand me a ladder. I blamed him for years because blame is easier than ownership. But the truth is, the ladder was optional. I kept climbing because it felt safe. That realization didn't excuse me. It just made me honest. I wasn't a victim of time. I made time serve my fear. Now when I feel the old reflex, I try to catch it early. When someone says, "We need to talk," I don't reach for the calendar. I don't say later. I sit down. I listen. I let discomfort sit in the room without trying to solve it. I try to be the kind of man who can stay present even when it's messy. Some nights I still miss her so sharply it surprises me. I miss the version of me that might have existed if I had chosen differently sooner. The decision I delayed until it was too late was the decision to stop hiding, to stop treating the people I loved like a future project, to stop saving my real self for a day that never arrived. I wish I'd made that decision when she was still in the kitchen, hands wet from dishes, telling me something inside her felt off. I wish I'd made it when she stood in the garage asking me to hear her. I wish I'd made it when the suitcase first appeared on the bed and the door was still open. But wishing can become another form of later if you aren't careful. So I do the only thing I can do now that I know the cost. I choose now. I choose faster truth. I choose to show up before the moment passes because time will take from you, and if you let it, it will take the parts you meant to keep.